and the parties filed supplemental letters. And for the following reasons, Diddy's motion is denied. Combs argues that the weight of evidence does not support a charge of trafficking. That's exactly right. That's trafficking? It's not. It's domestic violence. It's public relations. He can speak out about this. That's not a reason to keep him in custody. Influence the jury pool? Very different than witness tampering. Diddy not going anywhere. This is his fourth attempt to get out of custody. And we thought there may have been a chance here because the judge was asking very interesting questions like, well, what kind of security cameras would be there? And would he have access to his cell phone? And who's going to be there with him? And tell me about the security company and all those questions. Turns out Diddy staying locked up. 5-pager. This just dropped from the Southern District of New York, where Damian Williams, the prosecutor who's leading this case, is going to be resigning after Trump takes over. Trump has already nominated another person to replace him. But this is the status of the case, signed by Judge Arun Subramanian, the district judge. He says, all right, Diddy came back with a renewed motion for bail on November 8th. This was his fourth attempt. The court held a hearing and the parties filed supplemental letters. And for the following reasons, Diddy's motion is denied. No condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the safety of the community. The court has evaluated each of the factors: nature of the offense, weight of the evidence against Diddy, the history and the characteristics of Diddy, and the nature and seriousness of the release. And we've also reviewed a bunch of information that had been submitted, and a lot of this we have not seen. This is part of the problem with this case, is from what we see here, the evidence is pretty dang light, but a bunch of stuff is being filed under seal, which I don't appreciate, by the way. We need to know what the evidence is, unless Diddy wants it sealed, but in many cases, he does not. He wants the public to see more of this because he says the government's witnesses and victims are crap. Now, the court finds that the government has shown by clear and convincing evidence that there is nothing we can possibly do to ensure that the community would be safe if Diddy were released. They say a rebuttable presumption of detention applies to this case because they charged him with a serious crime, which is the trafficking crime, which is why they charged him with that, okay? Because it inverts that presumption. Normally, the presumption, as you would argue, is we release you because you have a presumption of innocence. But when there's a certain crime that involves a trafficking, they say you're too dangerous and we have to keep you forever. Even if Combs rebuts this presumption, which the court assumes here, it remains one of the factors that the court considers in determining whether the government has met its burden of persuasion. Saying here, the indictment charges Combs with serious and violent crimes. It alleges here in Rico that for decades, right, that they bundled it up into a conspiracy so that they could say that the overt acts occurred over a long period of time. Combs abused, threatened, and coerced women and others to fulfill his desires, protect his reputation, conceal his conduct. To do so, he relied on employees, resources, multifaceted business empire, and others. It says Combs himself carried or brandished firearms to intimidate or threaten others, and that included AR-15s and deface serial numbers and all these things, which he was like never charged for. When Combs' authority and reputation was threatened, the indictment alleges he and members of his enterprise engaged in acts of violence, threats of financial harm, reputational harm, and other things. These acts of violence included kidnapping and arson. The indictment also charges Combs with trafficking in violation, there it is, requiring the court to consider the nature of the offenses, whether it's a crime of violence, whether there's controlled substances and other things. So they hit him with that, and then it makes release way harder. Now, the government has presented direct evidence of Combs' violence. Let's see. Oh, okay, it's video from 2016. Exactly, right? There is clearly violence even in the version of the footage submitted by Combs and the text messages and victim one. So it's video from 2016. They couldn't charge him with that because it's too old, right? The statute of limitations has expired on that. So that's it. I have a black guy and a fat lip. You're sick for thinking it's okay to what you've done. I still have crazy bruising. Look, I'm not condoning domestic violence at all in any way, shape, or form. And there's something here. Somebody said something. Nevertheless, Combs argues that the weight of evidence does not support a charge of trafficking. That's exactly right. That's trafficking? It's not. It's domestic violence. If you want to charge him with domestic violence, do that. That's fine. In his view, it supports at best a toxic, sometimes violent, long-term relationship between Combs and this woman. But regardless of whether that's true, there is compelling evidence of Combs' propensity for violence, requiring the court to consider the history. And so he's been charged with trafficking. So just so you see how it works, they charge him with trafficking in violation of this. And then this, because of that trafficking charge, they need to hit him. So before you release him, because it's trafficking, now you consider the nature nature and the history and the characteristics of the person. Does he have any prior felonies? These are allegations, right? There is evidence supporting a serious risk of witness tampering as well. For example, Combs initiated and had unexplained communications with witness one, who was subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury and did testify. Combs was represented by lawyers at that time, and they have offered an explanation for some of those communications, but they could not explain them all. For instance, Combs's effort to call and text the witness one, even after witness one's grand jury testimony, or Combs's deleted text with this witness, right? So those are curious. Now, although the phone records confirmed that the defendant, Diddy, using a particular phone number and witness one exchanged multiple text messages from June to August, there were no text messages recovered from the cell phone. And you often see this, right? When you go to Verizon or whatever, they'll only have the record of the message being transmitted, but not the actual content of the message. So they said, oh, you got a bunch of messages from Saturday afternoon. Let me see your phone. What did you say on Saturday afternoon? Oh, those are deleted. Why'd you do that? Further, Combs's interaction with witness ones are directly in conflict with defense counsel's representations to Judge Carter that he did not reach out to a grand jury witness. He didn't do it and wouldn't do it. So they're like, lawyers, hello, you avowed for your client that Diddy wouldn't do it and he did it. So that's like bad for the lawyers, right? They're like, oh, shoot. So there is evidence that Combs violated the Bureau of Prisons regulations during his pretrial detention to obscure his comms. He paid other inmates to use their phone access code, use the messaging system. The government gives example of Combs utilizing these means as recently as November, directed to efforts to influence the jury pool. And that's a joke. Or to reach out to potential witnesses. Combs should be allowed to post whatever he wants on social media as loudly as he wants. He could hire a whole friggin' PR team if he wanted to influence the public opinion of which the jury pool will be there. That is his free speech right. It's public relations. He can speak out about this. That's not a reason to keep him in custody. Influence the jury pool, very different than witness tampering. Every time you speak out, you could theoretically influence the jury pool. So what's the limiting principle there? There is none. The court makes no determination that the content of Combs's communications was improper. Okay, so even the things he said weren't illegal, but his willingness to just skirt the rules in a way that could make it more difficult for communications to be monitored is strong evidence that the court cannot be reassured that his communications will be properly monitored. Unbelievable. So what he was saying in skirting the rules wasn't even bad. Nothing was even improper. Maybe he just needed more minutes. So for that reason, we can't release him. He knew that the government had concerns about witness tampering and he was still using other people's calling cards. Give me a break. Underscoring the court's concern, despite defense counsel's assurances that Combs stopped using that, the government indicates no, he did. And so the court further notes that it held an emergency hearing to address this, and there were legal pads that were recovered from Diddy's bunk during a sweep of the Metro Detention Center. At that hearing, defense counsel advised that all these legal pads say legal. Yes, they're marked as legal. But after the hearing, the court asked the question, why did you say that they were marked as legal when the photographs show they were not marked as legal? At the hearing, defense attorneys admitted that it has to be the case that as of the day of the search, legal wasn't in fact written on every legal pad. Well, why'd you say it was? I'm not sure, Your Honor. We thought that it did say legal on every pad, but it didn't. So the judge says, oh, well, so your representations are also not valid, which is not good. So the circumstances of this incident and the misrepresentation made at the hearing where Combs was present bear on whether the court can be reasonably assured that any conditions will actually be followed. And since you guys keep promising stuff that's not true, we're not going to believe you. The court assumes that it may consider the bail package, which has been proposed. However, given the nature of the allegations in this case and the information provided by the government, the court doubts the sufficiency of any conditions that place trust in Combs and individuals that he employs. And pretrial services reached the same conclusion, noting that at the November 22nd hearing, there are no conditions that could reasonably assure the safety of the community. Now, finally, the facts and circumstances here differ from those in Combs's principal cited authorities. Other cases were close calls and they let other people out. But in that case, in the Fox case, they didn't talk about obstruction because he wasn't doing those things. And in this other one, this guy had no flight risk issue. Was he a flight risk? There was criminal conduct here. These weren't violent offenses. There aren't Rico allegations like the ones they're making here. So the charges are different. And that other dude wasn't a violent guy. So Combs is different. Okay. Now, therefore, the release condition will remain the same. Motions for temporary release also denied. Not temporary release, not permanent release. Given Combs' access to counsel and the documents and firm deadlines, Combs has not carried his burden here, saying that he needs to be released for trial preparation or any of those things. And so the motion of Diddy's to get out of custody custody is denied. The clerk of the court directed to terminate the docket 60, so ordered, signed by Judge Arun Subramanian. Sean Combs remains in custody, not getting out anytime soon, probably not going to get out at all. Will remain in there until his trial, which will be coming up early next year. We'll be here covering it. Thanks for subscribing and joining us as we do.